What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another Star Wars podcast, Book of Boba Fett breakdown series. Today, we're going to be breaking down episode 4 of the show. But in case you didn't already know, I'm your host, Melissa.
And I'm your host, Matt.
How are you doing today, Matt?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm good. I actually, if you guys are watching this video, you can see that Han Solo was kind enough to let me record in the Millennium Falcon today. So that is very exciting.
Nice one. I don't know how you got that permission, but it's looking good.
I know it was very generous of him, and I'm very happy with the atmospheric look for our Star Wars themed podcast.
I love it. I'm a fan.
Thank you very much. So today, guys, just a little bit of quick news. We are changing our show format a little bit, not by much, but just a little bit. And what we're going to do is we are going to be breaking down our show into, I think, 6 parts. And those 6 parts, just for your reference, are we're going to open our shows with Star Wars news. Then we're going to get into an episode summary. Then we're going to talk about what we liked and we didn't like about the episode. We'll get to fan thoughts after that, our personal theories on the show and what we think is to come. And then the final verdict, which will be our rating and how we felt about the episode overall.
Perfect. I love it. We're so organized now.
We are. And I think that comes directly from a person who has to have things very neat and orderly in her life. And that also extends to the podcast. So it's not too different from what we've had going on up until this point. I just wanted to let you guys know we're not jumping around so much because we've had a tendency to do that up until this point. We're infamous for it.
Yeah. Organization's always a good thing.
It is. And I have 6 pages of notes that are going to get cut out because of backgrounds, but there are 6 pages of notes here today. So I am prepared. I hope you're ready, Matt, because this is going to be a chock full episode of just my thoughts. So I hope you're ready for that.
I'm ready. Why don't you hit us with it?
Okay, so part 1, Star Wars news. So this week in Star Wars news, we have new casting for the Ahsoka series. Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who is known for Birds of Prey, and Matt, this might surprise you, Sky High.
Oh, wait, that's a throwback.
Yes, I found out she was in Sky High. Has been added, so she's been added to the cast of Ahsoka. Any theories as to who she might be playing in that show?
In the Ahsoka show, that's a good question. I'm not sure because I read this news the other day too, and I'm not. Here's the thing: I'm keep getting confused. There's been so much Star Wars news and so many this even happens during like Book of Boba Fett and like it happened during Bad Batch too. I get confused with timelines and which characters we've seen where and like who's been cast in some of the new stuff. And there's so much new Star Wars stuff coming. I've lost track of who's in what.
I saw that Mary Winstead was cast, and I actually thought that she might play Princess Leia or maybe Barriss Offee from Clone Wars.
Ooh,
because she kind of has that look.
Yeah, she does. She definitely does. The possibilities are endless, right? It's like we don't have any clue of what kind of direction they're going to go with the show. So I'm not 100% sure. But the Princess Leia one's interesting. I actually haven't heard that one yet.
I think that could be very likely because remember how we were talking a few months ago about how it's highly likely that Luke is in this show just because of, connections to Anakin and maybe healing the relationship between Anakin and Ahsoka would be done through Luke. So I wouldn't want to write off Princess Leia because I think that there could be some possibility for story there. And, maybe Ahsoka meeting them because does she even know that they exist? Like,
yeah. Yeah. And how are they going to tell the story too? Is it going to be similar to Book of Boba Fett? Are they going to go into Ahsoka's past at all? Or are they going to just focus on her after we see her in Mando? Is she going to talk with Force Ghost Anakin and like maybe meet up with Luke and have a little bit of a fun catch-up session with him? Like, I don't know. The possibilities are endless, really.
Yeah. So I honestly, I think that'd be great if they brought her in as like a stand-in for Leia, and whether they or not they CG'd her, I wouldn't care because I think it'd be great to have Princess Leia in the show.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there's also lots of characters that like I'm not as familiar with Ahsoka's journey as probably you are. So there might be some characters that I'm like that just don't immediately come to mind for me. nevertheless, any kind of Star Wars news where we're adding more cast is exciting to me, and she's a great actress. So I think it's a good ad.
Yeah, I think it's a good ad too. And it also kind of got me thinking, Dave Filoni is involved with Book of Boba Fett right now, but I can't imagine that he's so involved like on a daily basis. I mean, we know that he wrote one episode of season 1 of Book of Boba Fett, probably like last year, 2 years ago at this point. But I'm like, most of his time has just got to be taken up by getting this Ahsoka show ready to go for production this summer.
Yeah, for sure. So is he writing a lot of those episodes?
I think he's like in full creative control. I'm pretty sure that there will be a few other directors, but I think for the most part, he's got like most of the control. And I believe Jon Favreau is involved too.
Yeah, cool, because that's Filoni's character, right? Like he
Yeah.
invented Ahsoka, so it would make sense if he's the one who has full creative control over what her journey looks like and what the show looks like.
Yeah. So I can't imagine that he's doing too much in shows like Book of Boba Fett. I mean, other than consulting and, for writing and, how timelines match up and all that stuff. But I got to imagine he's got his hands full with Ahsoka right now. So,
Oh yeah, for sure. And episode 6 of Book of Boba Fett.
yeah.
Maybe
we
making
know.
some final touches on that episode.
Hopefully I have hopes for that episode. One other bit of Star Wars news is Bad Batch season 2 is officially coming this spring. When, I have no idea, but it is this spring.
Wow, that feels like a fast turnaround for them. Good
So
for them.
fast.
Yeah,
I can't believe how fast. I feel like the show just ended season 1.
I know. Same. I mean, well, when did it end? End of the summer in 2021.
August.
Yeah. Wow, that feels like yesterday.
So fast. That feels so fast. But hey, I mean, I'm not complaining. I'm so excited about season 2. They ended the series finale on a massive cliffhanger. So I am excited to get straight into that.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm still curious if we'll see some tie-ins with that, with Book of Boba Fett. Who knows?
Possibly, but I'm thinking that's more of a season 2 kind of thing.
Yeah, maybe they'll have some tie-ins with Book of Boba Fett. Who knows? I don't know. It's exciting nevertheless, and I feel like this year is just gonna be one thing after the next with Star Wars content. So we could get a lot of excellent stuff in the near future.
I just don't know how we're going to keep up with like reaction videos.
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot, but it'll be fun. I'm happy we have the content to do it with, because there was a long Star Wars drought for a while. So now it's like the bounty is plentiful.
That's true. That's very, very true. But with that being said, let us dive into the episode summary. So this is our part 2 episode summary, and then we can dive into the episode and talk about what we liked and what we didn't.
Sounds good to me. Why don't you give them a nice synopsis?
That's not long. That's what she said.
Ha ha ha.
Okay. So the summary for episode 4 of Book of Boba Fett, and I didn't get the episode title. What was the episode title?
The Gathering Storm.
Okay. So the summary for episode 4 of Book of Boba Fett, The Gathering Storm, is Boba Fett partners with Fennec Shand. The director was Kevin Tanchorin, I think, and the writer was Jon Favreau. With that information in mind, let's get into what we liked first. Why don't you kick us off, Matt?
How about you kick us off, because you're the one with 6 pages of notes.
Okay, well, I'll kick us off. Fine. So
I have a feeling you have some thoughts about this, given the amount of notes you wrote.
It's just, I got carried away. I started to actually get a grasp on how I started to actually get a grasp on how I feel about the show up until this point, and all of them just like came spilling out on the page, like to the point where I wrote an essay. And you can't see this because of the stupid background, but I guess it doesn't matter. Okay, so what I liked, obvious Mandalorian tie-in. It's been two years, not quite 2 years. It'll be 2 years this December, but it feels like it's been 84 years since we've seen Din Djarin. And so even the mere mention of him, I was like, oh my gosh, I miss him so much. Just like bring him back. So loved that. Thought that was great. And everybody knew that was coming. We just didn't know when. So I'm very excited about that. The little rabbit droid that Boba and Fennec find in the kitchen. That rabbit droid is a LEP service droid, and we first saw it in I think the Clone Wars season 1 episode called Blue Shadow Virus, which is essentially the cast of the Clone Wars fighting coronavirus in Star Wars. If you've ever seen that episode, that's literally like what the episode is. And I think that was the first appearance of the service droid. And I don't think that they've been in live action up until this point. So I loved the fact that this droid made an appearance in the show, because anytime I get any connection to Clone Wars, I just get so excited because it connects the story so much for me. And it makes my mind able to process that all these stories are connected. So I really loved that. Uh, the General Grievous chef droid, which was clearly intentional. I loved that. I thought that was really funny. And I thought the design was cool. I really enjoyed seeing that, because I feel like little things like that in Star Wars, like nobody thinks about those questions where it's like, oh, what does a chef look like in Star Wars? Is it a human or is it a droid? Do they work at Dex's Diner?
Yeah.
So I liked how they started to get those tie-ins with Fennec's story and, you know, finding the fire spray gunship, but those were the highlights of the episode for me. What about you?
I agree. I loved the flashback in this one. I love how we got the Mando reference so early on in the episode with the musical themes there. I loved how he goes back and gets his ship. That was nice. And then obviously going back to the Sarlacc pit to get his revenge with his seismic charges. I love seismic charges. I'm a huge fan of seismic charges. So I loved seeing that. I thought that was amazing. And then, yeah, I think the inside look at Jabba's palace here was really cool. That initial droid who's down there cooking, obviously the General Grievous one, but then the other one who we see in Return of the Jedi. I don't know his name, but being able to see him, I thought was really, really cool. And that whole sequence of them like sneaking in and fighting the Gamorrean guards, I thought was excellent. So I would say that was probably my favorite parts of it. The second half of the episode, I don't think I liked as much. I think the first half was probably better. I don't know. What did you think about the second half?
I'm inclined to agree with you. And maybe this is what we tie into what we didn't like, because what I didn't like was a bit more prominent than what I did like, even though like I still enjoyed this episode a lot. But yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with you. The second half of the episode was not as engaging for me. I mean,
Yeah.
at least not until the very, very end when he goes, oh, or when Fennec is like, well, if you want muscle, you have to know where to look. And it goes, do 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 do
Yeah.
do do, and then that was the highlight. But the second half of the episode, I kind of found myself just like gazing at the screen. Like I didn't feel as involved. I just felt like I was watching. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. It just felt like there was some of that probably could have been cut out, in my opinion. Like I don't think it really was super plot forwarding type of information that we were getting there. I thought again the dialogue in this episode was a little weak. At some points, it just feels like they're reading the script and they're not. There's no oomph behind it. So that was one thing I didn't love. It was nice to get the explanation of Boba and his back to tank. You and I've been theorizing why that happened, and then it was like, oh, he needed to fully heal. So it's like, all right, that makes sense as to why he's been getting in his back to tank.
Can I
Uh,
ask you a question?
yeah,
How do you feel about using the flashbacks as a story tool? Because right now, I'm starting to feel like they didn't even need it in the first place. Like that they could have
yeah,
started the show in a linear fashion and then built up to the modern day. I don't think they need to be doing all the flashbacks, because I think it's not only choppy, but it's why we have so much confusion on the timelines of
yeah.
everything.
It definitely throws the pacing off, and that actually reminds me of the other thing I didn't like about this episode, which is the timelines have become very confusing now. And you can see this in my reaction video where I'm like, wait a minute, so he was with the Tuskens for 5 years? Because when he goes to see Mando, obviously that's 5 years after the Battle of Yavin, right? So what he's been gone for 5 years, like it doesn't feel that way. So as I mentioned, it makes the pacing feel a bit off, and it is a little confusing by not telling the story linearly. It's hard to follow at times, and I think it felt rushed a little bit. And that kind of goes along, like now that I'm looking back at the other episodes, having seen them in context with the Tuskens and whatnot, I think I feel very confident saying that now, that it does, like the pacing just feels a little off with the show. So I do agree with you. Like by not telling it like in a linear fashion, jumping back and forth has made it a little hard to follow, and it's been hard to kind of follow Boba's motivations because he's kind of two different people when we first see him coming out of the Sarlacc pit, being this ruthless bounty hunter. And then afterwards, there's a big transition there. And if you're hopping between those two stories, it's harder to follow what his character transition is to make him the way that he is and follow his motivation for as to why he wants to become the daimyo, right? So
Yes.
that's kind of how I feel looking at it at the last 4 episodes with the full context now.
No, I totally agree. And I'm so glad you said something on Boba's characterization because, things like the Tuskens. Initially, I thought the role of the Tuskens in terms of Boba's personal character arc, that they were going to be the reason that he has such a big morality change. But if you watch the show from the start till now, and it's only 4 episodes in, and honestly, things could change, and I'm open to that. But if you watch the show from start till now, he doesn't start off that bad of a person to begin with. Like
Yeah.
he doesn't start off as a ruthless, I only care about my next paycheck bounty hunter, as was the impression in like Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. That is the vibe that he gives off. I mean, like, for God's sake, it's like he just wants money when Han Solo is put in carbonite. Like, he doesn't care about what happens to him or how it affects Leia. But then by the time you get to the point where he gets out of the Sarlacc pit, it's like all of that characterization in the old movies is dissipated, and he's all of a sudden this very decent guy who tries to help the other prisoner escape, who's very nice to the Tuskens and forms a bond with them really, really quickly. And so now I'm just kind of getting confused. I'm like, what made him change? Like, where was the change? Or did he just never have a change to begin with? Why did he start off a pretty decent person, and then in modern day he's also a pretty decent person? Like, I don't think that they illustrated the character depth as well as they could have up until this point. Am I making sense?
Yeah. Well, let me play devil's advocate for a minute because I get what you're saying, but with this character, we don't really see much development in the other movies, so we don't really know who he is. And you have to remember, him as a bounty hunter, he's bounty hunting for Darth Vader. There's not a lot of room there. He's motivated by money. He's just kind of his own free spirit. We don't know how he is outside of that. He's doing a job, right? So, and that's all he's been known to do. So I think it's hard to be able to jump in and say, oh, he's definitely like a ruthless guy. We don't really see him being that ruthless in Return of the Jedi or anything like that. And so just to like kind of look at the other side of the coin, I'm thinking we didn't really have much of context on who this guy was beforehand. So maybe he was a halfway decent dude before. That being said, I do see what you're saying because I do think that with the tone of the show, they're trying to illustrate that he's become changed and that there's been a transformation along the way, as we see in his little desert LSD session that he has. So I totally get where you're coming from, but just to kind of play devil's advocate on the other side, like we didn't really 100% know who he was beforehand, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. I agree. I guess it's mostly the impression. Like, my issue with it up until this point is the fact that he hasn't had a character change at all. Like, they didn't start him off one way and then have him evolve into an entirely different way by the end of the show. It's kind of like we're almost missing those character moments that are making him do what he wants to do. And we kind of got an explanation in episode 4, but I'm even still confused as to why he wants to be the daimyo so bad, and why he's helping out Tatooine, and why he's on this planet, and why he gives a damn about like the politics and how it affects them. And I guess that goes into my next point, which I will find here on my page because I wrote everything down. Where's the evidence of this? In I guess of his character growth, because initially, if we want to go back to like the mods, the little Power Rangers biker gang, when they're first mentioned by Lortha Peel in episode 3, he first says, oh, like a gang of insolent youths is stealing my water and they use these robotics to change their body parts. I initially anticipated that they were going to be these scrappy young teenagers struggling to survive, and they're like dying, and they'd have to put on these body parts to replace the body parts that aren't working because they're just trying to survive. And I thought we were going to get a much darker interpretation. And then, like, Boba takes pity on them because he's like, oh man, I was a young kid once who didn't have a father, who didn't have a family. And so he like takes them in and he gives them work. And that would therefore be his motivation to kind of like want to help the people of Tatooine. And I guess like I'm not seeing a super clear character motivation for why he's doing what he's doing. And I suppose that one could argue that the Tuskens were kind of that motivation, but they were almost put in the show and then taken out of it so fast to the point where it's not having the impact it's supposed to have. And that's my
Yeah.
rant.
Yeah, and I don't totally disagree with you in terms of like because that kind of goes to telling the story the way it's told. Having multiple flashbacks in each episode definitely chops it up more and makes it a little harder to follow in terms of how his character is progressing over each episode, which is why again, if they maybe have had just started the show with him coming out of the Sarlacc pit and given us an episode or two completely about the next, I don't know, year or two of Boba living with these Tuskens, it would have helped us understand that motivation for why he wants to become the daimyo and finding his armor, but it also would have made the impact of the Tusken deaths a lot more impactful. It would have made it more meaningful, I guess. So yeah, I think that it all kind of boils down to how the story is being told, and I can kind of see what they're doing, and it's somewhat illustrated, um, but it's not as effective, I think, as intended.
Even in this episode, he's Boba is sitting by the campfire with Fennec and he's like, I'm tired of our kind dying because our employers are stupid or something. Like I'm paraphrasing. I've seen the episode twice and I don't remember the exact dialogue, but he's sitting with her by the fire and he's like, I'm sick of our kind dying and we don't need to be losing so much money and all of this other stuff that he says that I can't remember accurately. And it's just not enough to convince me that that would make him want to stay on this planet and become the daimyo and improve the quality of life on Tatooine and then be really involved with the Pikes. It's just I don't think that the choices in a narrative way have had that big of an impact on the story as maybe they could have, and I just think that that's my personal issue with it so far. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't hate it. Like I'm not saying that I'm not hating it. I'm just kind of like I don't think that's as strong as it could be, as
yeah,
they could be making the show at this time.
I agree, and I think again, maybe his motivation from the start is like he realizes once he gets knocked into the Sarlacc pit that he's dispensable in a way, and then he finds himself out in the desert, and it's like, oh, what am I doing with my life? Like that could be a pretty stark change if that happened to anybody, But if that is the case, it hasn't been illustrated.
Yeah, that's the thing is I feel like there's an issue there if and I've seen people online talking about this. There's an issue there if you can't clearly illustrate why he's doing what he's doing. Because at some parts in these episodes, it just seems like he's doing it because he doesn't have anything better to do.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't. You don't feel his motivation, and you feel a bit disconnected from his character. If I'm being totally honest. Now, with all that being said, this show has had, I'd say, some of the best Star Wars scenes, a couple of the best Star Wars scenes, um, in a while. Like the train scene was just awesome. Like
Totally agree.
Boba going through the desert was awesome. Him breaking out of the Sarlacc pit, the opening scene of the show, awesome. You know what I mean? And like the Tusken stuff too, like him humanizing the Tuskens in a way, awesome. But in terms of the overall picture so far, it just has felt a little disjointed. So I do feel where you're coming from. But that being said, I still think it's been an interesting show so far, but I think the closest thing we could probably compare it to is The Mandalorian. And with The Mandalorian having that linear storytelling, it was way more beneficial to the show and the character, and it was easier to see the progression throughout. That's not to say The Mandalorian was perfect in all ways. The first couple episodes I thought were a little clunky in some areas, but then once they figured out their stride, they kept going. And that's the other thing I'm trying to keep in mind with this show is like sometimes it does take a while to get up and going, before you kind of hit your stride with the way the story's told. Um, but naturally, if you have different directors directing different episodes too, they're going to have an idea of how they want to shoot it, which is why I think that also adds to the disconnection between some of these episodes. It's already hard enough jumping between timeline and timeline, but if you have different directorial styles in each one as well, that's also going to make it feel a little bit more disconnected, in my opinion.
I think that's incredibly well said. I think the show has some really strong moments, i.e., the train scene, which is the standout moment to me in the show. That was so incredibly well done and so well shot and so well executed. I was having the time of my life watching that scene. And I'm not saying this to crap on the show. It's just kind of like some of it's not hitting me in the emotional ways as well as I personally think it could, but I'm not writing off the show as bad in its entirety.
Oh no, and I mean some of the other awesome elements of the show is the practical effects are just insanely good. Like with the Rancor and the robots, the droids, the droid that drives the train, even and the
Oh,
little
so good. I love that droid.
and the Gamorrean guards, and the way they've crafted Mos Espa and Mos Eisley and like the Bantha, and like that's all awesome. And I'm a huge, huge, huge fan of that. So I think it just needs to balance out a little bit. Are they going to do more flashbacks?
I think they pretty much said we're done with flashbacks because
Yeah.
the droid was like, hey, you're completely healed. And
Yeah.
then at the end with the Mando tie-in, something tells me that they're going to keep it linear from here on out because they only have 3 episodes left to finish the story of season 1.
Yeah, and that is a little bit of a bummer for me because I felt the same way where I thought, what a shame, like to be able to have 2-hour-long episodes about what happens after he gets out of the Sarlacc pit to now. There's a lot
Yeah.
of story you could have told there in a very cohesive way. Where you just take 2 episodes, describe that part, right? And then the rest of the show can be about, all right, now we know his motivations for shooting Bib Fortuna and why he's had this transformation. So there, I don't know. It'll just be interesting to kind of see how they play out these next 3 episodes, because the pacing will be different because we're not going to be jumping back and forth. So that might give us a little bit more wholeness in terms of ending the season.
Again, I don't like to judge a show on its merit until it's entirely completed. I mean, we said this about Bad Batch all the time. I mean, there were some like creative choices in there that a lot of people were upset about. And, you and I kept reiterating, we're like, just let it finish and then judge it as a season, as a cohesive story. I still stand by that. It's just for me, when I watch television, I typically don't understand how I feel about a show until the 4th or 5th episode in, because then you kind of get a bigger idea of the narrative and the direction they're starting to take. So while I am reserving judgment for the season as a cohesive story, I don't feel like it's unfair to necessarily say, you know what, so far, these elements are fantastic, but these elements I don't think are working that well.
Yeah, it would have been also nice, I think, to see Boba like maybe leave Tatooine afterwards, right, and try to find like, I think having him do a little bit of soul searching or something, because he's like, oh, I'm left for dead in the desert, like I'm expendable. And then
Existential crisis, essentially.
yeah, and we didn't really see that. He's been on Tatooine the whole time.
And he seems very chill about everything, like he
Yeah, you don't
doesn't
really
seem
get
like
many callbacks to what was going on in Return of the Jedi or any of that stuff, and it's like I think that's a little bit of a missed opportunity, right?
I feel like what they could have done is they could have, if they wanted to go the flashback route, I mean, and maybe they incorporate flashbacks in the midst of that linear storytelling that pertain maybe more to what was going on during the Return of the Jedi era, or just more information about his time as a bounty hunter and, his conflict in trying to like break away from that and to become a new person that's entirely separate from who he was known as before. And it's just like, I'm not seeing any stark character contrast. He's been the same. And so I find it hard to be invested in his personal story because of that.
Yeah, well said. I also think like he doesn't seem to care about that the Empire's dissolved. They don't make any mention of that, right? Like, I don't know. They're just it has felt kind of disconnected from the rest of the universe in a little bit of a way. He's kind of been on his own little island. But that being said, still several episodes left to see what they do with it. I don't know how likely it is that we'll see some of the people maybe we were hoping to see, but there's still 3 episodes left, and there's a lot that can be told in those 3 episodes, and maybe that'll help make it feel more complete. So I agree with you. Like, let's wait till the whole thing's done to see the whole big picture. But now that we kind of know the path that it's on, and be able to reflect on these last couple episodes, I think what we're saying is, I mean, it's just how we feel,
Yeah.
but I think still overall I'm a fan. It's definitely like an interesting show, and there's been some moments where I'm like, oh, this is so good, and this is so Star Warsy. There's just been a couple that have been like, uh, it's not perfect, but like it doesn't need to be perfect, you
No.
know.
No. Just constructive criticism. To add to, I don't want to say what I disliked, or I don't like saying that, but maybe things that could be improved upon. The other thing I recognized when I was watching the episode is I kind of figured out my main issue with the mod gang. And I recently rewatched The Search for Spock, Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock from the late 70s, early 80s. I don't know. Either way, it doesn't matter. But I realized after watching it how much the mods fit aesthetic wise and design wise into Star Trek way better than they would Star Wars. Because when I was watching it, I was thinking, and even in the episode, this most recent episode, you see some of the characters have, those robotic eyes zooming in and out, or they'd have the thing on their forehead and or right above their temple, those little modifications. And I was sitting here and I was like, oh my God, they remind me of the Borg in Star Trek. They have that exact vibe. And I think my main issue with the mods is the translation to Star Wars, not the concept. The design bothers me the most because they feel more Star Trek in design.
Yeah, I agree, but also I think the direction of how they handle the characters, I think their dialogue is like that's it just kind of takes you out of it. It kind of feels like they're just reading lines at points. And when they come to Boba's rescue, you don't feel like what's their motivation? Like he just met him like a scene or two ago. You know what I mean? When they're fighting Black Croissant, and you're like, okay, like great, cool fight scene, very cool. But there's no like, it just feels like there's a lack of motivation for them, and they just feel slightly out of place. And so maybe that's why. And maybe you're right. Maybe like that's a good comparison. They do kind of feel like the Borg a bit, especially with like the eye thing. It's like okay,
It's honestly the two issues, and the dialogue, I will agree with you on that. The dialogue's been so, I don't want to say cheeky, but it has been like a little bit corny. And part of that is the actors, and then part of that is due to the script. But in a really, I have two trains of thought. My two trains of thought are, one, yes, I don't think their motivations are clear. I think what I would have done to improve that is maybe have Boba meet them shortly after he interacts with the Tuskens, and they're like these, I don't know, these starving kids with robotic parts, and he just happens to see them. He just happens to take notice of them, but he doesn't do anything about it. And then flash forward to when he saves Fennec and he takes her to them and they fix her up. There's still like these scrappy kids who are starving but with their robotics, but they help her and him. Maybe he remembers that all those years later.
right?
And then like he comes back and he's like, I am going to help you because you helped me. And I guess an argument could be made that that's already what happened, but we've never really seen like a connection between Boba and these mods. It's just kind of like, oh, I remember you. You repaired what's her face. You want to work for me? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, they certainly feel. They just, I don't know. It's something about them that just feels a little off. But that's not to say they don't have their place. I just think their introduction wasn't done the best way. but and I certainly like the the chase scene, the chase scene with them and their Power Rangers motorcycles. Like that just felt very out of place. And like it's not to say it's like terrible. It just didn't feel organic and right. But there have been a lot of moments in the show that have felt super organic and right. Like Tamora Morrison, I think, has been fantastic throughout. I think his acting's been great. I think like some of the effects and like some of the there's been certain scenes that it just feel like they feel super organic and natural. So which makes when these kids come in, I think that's what makes it feel that much more not organic, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is there's several beats that are like, all right, we're on a good rhythm, and then something kind of throws the rhythm off a little bit. Again, it's the pacing thing, and that can kind of go back to jumping around in the timeline as well.
Just to kind of play off what you're saying, and I'm going to read from my notes because I wrote this down because it came to me actually a few hours ago. I said, in a lot of ways, it reminds me of the pod racing scene in The Phantom Menace. That scene's like really famous, for many reasons because of, the Anakin quotes and the sound design. But the main thing about that gets me that I think works well is it's very similar to our worlds and races like the Indy 500, for example. Um, but the translation from our worlds into that movie worked really well because they put it through like a metaphorical like Star Wars blender,
Yeah.
and they translated it into the Star Wars realm where they were like, okay, so if there are races in Star Wars that people have, what does that look like in the universe? And they have all these crazy different designs for the pod racers, but there's also like dust on them and like little insignias that's like, oh, this is Sebulba's pod racer and this is Anakin Skywalker's pod racer, but it still reflected our world but felt very Star Wars in appearance and design. And I think the lack with the mods is that they didn't put it through the Star Wars blender enough to the point where it looked like it could be translated into Star Wars, because the issue is not the concept, it's just the execution.
Yeah. Yeah, I that's a fair point, and I think if you compare it to the chase scene on Coruscant with Anakin and Obi-Wan in Episode 2, that feels very Star Wars because you're right. They put it through that blender. It's like, all right, they're on this big city. They're on a planet where the whole planet's a city, right? And the speeders and stuff are like all up in the air and they're flying around. Like, how would that look if there was a chase scene there, right? And the speeders have these like they're really cool, weird looking, and they kind of look like a car or whatever, but they're not. They're floating, and like they make the sound design. Talk about that. It's awesome. Like I can
Amazing.
hear it in my head right now. It's excellent. Same thing with the pod racing. So you're right. They put it through this blender, but with that chase scene, for example, they just looked like motorcycles without the wheels, and so it didn't feel blended enough necessarily into the Star Wars universe. And I don't think they took it to that next level really in terms of how a chase scene would look like on Mos Espa.
So even further to that, the Sand Riders that Boba completely wipes out in this episode.
Yeah.
The Sand Riders, they look like modern day bikers in our world, but they feel very Star Wars.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And their speeders, like they have that same feel to the speeders on Endor, for example. Like the way they have the same sounds and stuff like that, and the way you ride them is very similar. Which, by the way, side note, I did love that scene too. I forgot about that till you brought it up. But when Boba just goes and blasts them all, I thought that was awesome. That was definitely one of
So
my
funny.
favorite scenes in the show so far. That felt like a very Boba Fett thing to do. It felt very much in his character. It felt very Star Warsy, very vindictive of him. But yeah, just a side note there. I love that how Boba kind of went out and got his revenge on both them and the Sarlacc pit. So, anyways, tangent over.
No, I totally agree, because it did feel very much like something he would do. And even further to that, like Fennec's reaction was like, like it was just so chill for such a violent act. It was so chill, and I just thought that was really funny. But I don't know, it's like if you're looking at the Sand Riders in comparison to the mods, I feel like that's a really good example of one being put through the Star Wars blender translation from our modern day into Star Wars. One was done, I think, very well, and the other one felt like it missed.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that the concept of the mod bikers are bad. The concept is not bad. I just don't think it was translated into the world of Star Wars as well as it could have been.
Yeah.
And especially into the world of Tatooine,
Yeah, for sure. And that's totally a fair assessment.
With that being said, how do you feel about the Pike storyline?
Wasn't really developed much in this past episode. I mean, they talked about it a little bit with the other crime dudes. Again, feels a little disjointed because the story hasn't been told linearly. So it's just there's been a lot going on, so it's hard to keep your brain focused on each individual thing and remember that it's a thing when, like, in one storyline he's doing this and another storyline he's doing that, and then they kind of come together and like you kind of forget where things sit. I like it. I mean, I love the idea of the Pikes coming to try to like take over Tatooine, and that's initially where this battle's going. What about you?
I honestly thought that they were going to go for a crime families war for control over Tatooine to be the daimyo. I thought that I honestly like when I watched the trailer back in I don't know, September, October when it first came out, I honestly thought they were going to pit the crime families against each other and Boba was going to have to fight to like keep the title and that's how they were going to bring Din Djarin in. I don't necessarily know how big of a deal it is for the Pikes to come in and, you know, push their spice trade on the planet and like absorb the planet through spice, as Boba said. Like, I don't really know what the stakes are in that particular issue. That being said, I have a theory that we can save for the end of this episode where I don't necessarily think that the Pikes are the biggest baddie in this. I think that there's someone else behind this. And again, I'll share it in the theory part of our episode, but I think there's somebody above the Pikes that's pulling the strings. So
Crimson Dawn, maybe.
yeah, I think, and let's save this for our theory section, but I think that there is a likely chance that Crimson Dawn and even above that, Kira might have a say in what's going on here.
Interesting.
So we're gonna have to talk about that.
We'll chat about that in our theories.
Do you have any other things that you liked or didn't like about the episode, or?
No, I think we covered it all. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the next episode. Obviously, seeing Din Djarin will be awesome, and I'm happy with it overall. Like I know I threw out some criticism, but I really enjoyed the episode. It's just I guess looking at the whole season so far in some context, I'm looking back on it with a different eye, but still, I'm happy with it so far.
Yeah, I mean it's entertaining. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
It's not. I don't think like when some of these criticisms come up, it's like completely different than my criticisms of the sequel trilogy or people's criticisms of the prequel trilogy. Like I think they're all different. I just think these are kind of like we said last week in our episode. This thing didn't hit as strong as it could, but it's not ruining my experience of the show. Like I still like the show. I still enjoy the show.
Yeah, same. I'm still really looking forward to next week.
So, with that being said, we are now going to get into our fan thoughts portion of the episode. So, I don't know if you want me to go on YouTube community or if you want to go on there.
I have one pulled up. I think that we can read if you'd like. All right. So we asked you guys on our community page, what are your thoughts and theories on episode 4? We had Kelatar, I don't know if I'm saying that right, said one highlight for me was the characterization of Fennec. She didn't go, you saved me life debt, like many assumed after the tragedy, but reacted in her usual lone fox way. If I help you, then my debt is paid. Even when she warmed up to Boba, she'd offer to do jobs with him as a contractor. The partnership is a big change for her, and I like that she didn't just jump at it right away. One aspect of it that wasn't brought up, Fennec didn't really have any options by this time. The New Republic had put all her old employers in lockdown. She was out of work and hunted. Remember, she first assumed Boba had saved her to get her bounty. Her career had effectively reached a dead end. Yeah, I thought this was cool. I liked the when Bobo rescued her. I thought that was a nice little interaction that they had. It helps explain their relationship a lot and develop that in a really nice way, I thought. And they already have a good dynamic, and I think this was one element of the show that really helped accentuate why their dynamic is so good.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking at the same thought right now, and I like Fennec and Boba's dynamic. It's just kind of like no thoughts, we just vibing and kicking ass, and it's kind of like the equivalent of like being so, I don't want to say like solemn, but they're like solemn badasses. We're just like chill. They're like, but they're not like doing it with any facial expression.
Yeah.
Fennec really doesn't have any options at this point, and bounty hunting just to bounty hunt at that point. And so I guess she was like, I'll try something new. This guy's got guts. He's gonna go kill the current daimyo and take over. Seems legit. I mean, they're just vibing, and I enjoy it.
He's offering her more freedom, it's a good opportunity for her.
It looks good on her bounty hunting resume.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, so Hidden Scribble says, it's so sick that Boba is hiring some of our favorite characters to help him fight the Pikes. We already have Chrysanthemum, Din is next, and I think it's likely that we see Bosk and or Dengar. We might also get Cad Bane on the Pike side, but that just might be my wishful thinking.
Interesting theory there, for sure. Yeah, and we asked another question in our community. Who do you think is going to show up in a cameo other than Mando. I think Bosk is likely. I think that's probably the most likely one.
Mm.
Gengar, I think, is least likely, and Cad Bane's like wild card. Like, obviously, it's fan service right there. That's what everyone wants to see, and that would be a huge moment. But I think, I think Bosk is probably we're probably most likely to see him, and I think the setup that they're doing of him fighting the Pikes, of Boba fighting the Pikes, has been really cool. And Chrysanthemum, I don't think we've talked about him enough, but like he's a very cool character. I think ultimately, like having him on the screen, like the way they do him up, like it's a very cool. It's a very cool character. He looks menacing. He looks mean. I like him a lot. So I think it's been great so far. Absolutely.
I totally agree on Black Chrysanthemum. Black Croissant is, I'm still gravitating towards Black Croissant, but I feel like I need to say Black Chrysanthemum. Otherwise, people think I'm pronouncing it wrong. But I love the introduction of that character. In particular, I think the makeup and effects on him are ridiculously good because he's still, and I was thinking about this the other day, he still emotes like
Yeah, he does. Like when he has his
crazy.
eyebrow up at Boba, when Boba's like, "You can go," and he's like, like
It's
really cool.
Crazy. Like that amount of emotion on the character for a Wookiee character cannot be easy. So I just props to the team right there because that looks crazy good. And I'm so impressed like with the effects done on that character.
Yeah.
One thing that
totally.
Hidden Scribble does bring up that I think is really interesting is the Pikes could totally hire bounty hunters to fight Boba Fett. I mean, that is a very likely possibility. I mean, we saw in Bad Batch, the Kaminoans hired Fennec and Cad Bane. I mean, both, it was the prime minister and then Nala Se, obviously. But the Pikes could totally hire somebody like Cad Bane if they wanted to do that and then have him be on the opposite team as Boba Fett because obviously we had that unfinished reel in Clone Wars where Cad Bane was supposed to take Boba under his wing to see if he could be just as good as Jango, and then they have that standoff. But there could be some beef between them still. I don't know if Boba would actually call like Cad Bane up and be like, "Hey, dude, come fight for my army, even though you tried to kill me."
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right.
You read the next one.
This is more. We also asked the question: what are your thoughts and theories on Book of Boba Fett so far? And this kind of goes to back what you and I were talking about, more of like the series as a whole. But Dual MP5 actually made a nice point that said it's not a perfect series, neither was Mando, but some people are actively hating it as if the show killed their puppies or something. Mando is more episodic, like Monster of the Week format. This is more like a long movie split into 7 parts. And under that, we had a comment that said, I get the complaints. The show has some flaws, but overall it's very good. And Mando season 1 wasn't so much better either. And I think those are both totally fair things to say. Like, it is the first season of a brand new show, so it's obviously not going to be perfect. But what we do have so far is some really, really good nuggets here and there of like really good Star Wars content. So, you and I may criticize here and there, but ultimately I really, really like the show, and I love the direction it's going, and I'm excited to see how it ties in even more to other Star Wars content.
Well said. I agree with that. So, are there any other questions that you want to read?
No. Are there any more from you?
One of the people I know on Instagram, Art by Crystal, messaged me, and she said that Jennifer Beals is the big bad, the woman in the Twi'lek makeup in the bar. Jennifer Beals is the big bad. Why else would they have such a wonderful actress sit for 8 hours in a makeup chair if she is not the villain?
Ooh, that is an interesting theory. She could definitely have something to do with it all. That's a good point because she's only been here and there.
But they keep going back to her. That is
Yeah,
interesting.
They do. So maybe she's not the one orchestrating everything, but maybe she has a connection to someone who is actually the puppet master behind the Pikes invading and whatnot.
Her looks can kill. That's all I'm gonna say about her.
She looks great. She's like 60 years old. Good for her.
60. Shut up.
Yeah, I think so. I think she's almost 60, 58, something like that.
She looks amazing.
Jennifer Beals is 58 years old, born
December
19th, 1963.
Shut up. Jennifer Beals. She's crushing it.
Yeah, she is. She kills it.
Wow, she looks amazing. Okay. Actually, that would be kind of awesome if she was pulling the strings. But
Good theory.
that's a great theory. And speaking of theories, this brings us to part 4 in our episode, which are fan theories. Should I kick it off or do you want to kick it off?
You may kick it off.
Oh, thank God, because I was going to say I want to kick it off anyway. So, okay, the first theory that I wrote down is that obvious one. If Din Djarin is coming to the show, does that mean we are going to get more bounty hunters in addition? Bosk, Dengar, Cad Bane. But further to that, could we get Bo-Katan? Because in the last episode of The Mandalorian Season 2, Din is the rightful ruler of Mandalore because he bested, what's the Empire guy's name?
Moff Gideon.
Moff Gideon. He bested Moff Gideon in combat. And the legend is if you defeat someone who has the Darksaber, that makes you the rightful leader of Mandalore. So Din technically is the rightful leader of Mandalore. And Mandalorians are just known to go with it and follow the rightful leader who won the Darksaber in combat. So Bo-Katan is like a born and bred Mandalorian, as are her followers. And I know that there was some apprehension from her when she saw that Din won the Darksaber, but is it possible that she would follow Din into this battle on Tatooine? That's a question I have. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's one of my theories as well. That was where my mind initially went to, just because we saw her last with Din. So they could be hanging out. We don't know. We have no idea. So it would not surprise me at all. I think that's a high likelihood that we see her and her little sidekicks. I forget their names.
Thing 1 and Thing 2.
Yeah.
This just hit me. Is it possible that Boba Fett leaves to find Din? Because one of two things could happen. He could totally just call him up and be like, hey, dude, I need your help. Will you come down here and help me fight this battle? Or could he go looking for him? And maybe this is a stretch. And I think this is kind of maybe too big of a stretch. But would we go to Mandalore? I mean,
interesting.
It's a really big stretch because it's like in The Mandalorian, if you bring another famous character in, like Ahsoka in The Mandalorian, suddenly everybody's focused on Ahsoka and they're not focused on Din so much because, oh my God, it's Ahsoka. In a similar way with Book of Boba Fett, they have to be careful about what and who they bring in, because then it doesn't become about Boba, it becomes about whatever character is cameoing in whatever show is going on. But could we see Mandalore? Do you think that's a possibility? Because the Mandalorians in Mandalore, that is like that. So could Boba go get Din on Mandalore?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a possibility. Just given the way the show's been shot so far, I would imagine they stay on Tatooine because they've been here pretty much the whole time.
Oh, we got to get off Tatooine.
Here and there. But yeah, that's actually a good theory. Like him having to go out and actually find Din could be the focus of the next episode, and that could very well be Mandalore for sure.
I mean, I know it's a stretch just because they've kept the narrative so strictly focused, but it would just be nice to see Boba get off the planet for one episode. Like, even if it's one, it would just be really nice.
Yeah. I think it'd be awesome. I mean, either way, being able to see Din again is going to be awesome, and maybe we'll have some introduction to some other characters that might jump off for some of these other shows that are coming out this year as well. Also, like Omega.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Will we have any connection there in these last 3 episodes? Will we see it next episode? I'm not sure. I would guess it'd either be the second to last or last episode where we get a reference, and then that would tie nicely into Bad Batch Season 2. I'd imagine it'll probably be more of a reference than actually see her live action, but I could be totally wrong. But that's another thing that's definitely sitting in the back of my mind here.
You know, Fennec was hired to capture Omega. She knows that Omega exists. And I don't know to what extent her knowledge is about Omega, or if she knows that Omega is related to Boba, but could that be information from Fennec to Boba where she's like, yeah, dude, I know about your sister. And Boba's like, what? If he has never heard of Omega, which I think might be unlikely, because I think they hinted pretty strongly in Bad Batch Season 1 that Boba Fett is going to be in the Bad Batch at some point. But would Boba, if Boba has knowledge of Omega, would he hire Omega?
That's a really good question. Or if he knows the Bad Batch exists.
Yeah. Oh my God. Oh my
Does he
God.
enlist their help as well?
This could tie in perfectly with Bad Batch season 2. If it's coming this spring, that
Yeah.
could be the perfect, oh my God.
They come in as a Deus Ex Machina moment where they kind of are the saving grace for Boba against the Pikes or something. I don't know. I think it'd be tough to do, but again, it's a possibility for sure.
I mean,
Um,
they'd have to be so careful though, because then those are big characters to introduce to live action A that quick, and then B, do it in a way that doesn't take away from Boba. Because if you bring Omega in, then suddenly everybody's going to be like, oh my God, Omega. And it's not going to be, oh my God, Boba. So whatever they do, it's going to have to make sense for the story, and they're going to have to be careful.
yeah, you have to be really careful with that, especially having one actor play both.
Oh, I'm so looking forward to the day if they ever do Bad Batch in live action. I'm so looking forward to that because that will be so chaotic.
Yeah. Uh, I don't know. The possibilities are endless, especially as we get to these last couple episodes. I think starting out so far, it's really just setting up kind of the tone of the show and filling in some holes about how Boba got out of the Sarlacc pit and all that. But now that we're like more focused on one element of the story, there's a lot that they can bring in. So going to Mandalore, possibility. I don't necessarily think it's going to happen. Bringing in Omega, again, possibility. I would imagine it'll probably be more of a mention. Same with Bad Batch, but Bo-Katan I think is a likely possibility of seeing her along with Mando, and then some tie-ins there to season 3 of Mando, as well as the mentions going into Bad Batch season 2.
What about your personal theories? I mean, we talked a little bit about Crimson Dawn. Why don't you delve into that? Because you've clearly been thinking about that too.
Look, I don't know tons about Crimson Dawn, but that's it. That's definitely a thought. I mean, you think about Pikes, you think about Solo, you think about Maul, you got to think about Crimson Dawn. Um, I think there's been not a lot of clarity on who's leading the Pikes right now. Right, you've seen
Yep.
the leader guy, right, in his robes and stuff, but you don't really know like who's ordering them to come there, like what's going on behind the scenes, and so it's likely that Jennifer Beals' character could, but now that I'm thinking about it, could have some kind of connection to Crimson Dawn and having the Pikes come to Mos Espa and eventually all of Tatooine. But what about you? Like, you probably know a little bit more about it than me.
Honestly, I saw Solo once. I didn't really like it all too much, but I know the knowledge of that movie and how it connects to everything else. I mean, even at the end of Clone Wars, like we've discussed a million times, Maul is talking to the leaders of Crimson Dawn. So, I mean, Jennifer Beals' character could definitely be involved, but what if she's working for like Kira? Because Maul's dead by this point, and
Yeah.
in the comics, he has been training Kira not only as a fighter, but and somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't read all the comics, but as like the Crimson Dawn leader, so she could be pulling the strings. So honestly, I don't think that the Pikes are the only big bad. I think that there's somebody above them.
Yeah. Yeah. It could definitely be Kira. I mean, would they bring Amelia Clark back? I don't know. I mean, she's a expensive actress. So that would be my
Yeah,
only like in terms of logistics, getting her to come and do this show. Maybe. But yeah, I think there's definitely some possibility there that Crimson Dawn's the one behind all of this, and it's just a matter of in what capacity and who's the one.
right, right. If not Kira, somebody else behind it, because I don't know, dude. I have such a hard time believing that the Pikes could be this organized and like
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's not that I think that they're a goofy villain. It's just I have a really hard time believing that they're the antagonist of this show. I think that there is an unseen person pulling strings, and I don't know who it is, but I don't believe that they're the antagonist. You know?
Right. Well, we haven't seen a leader of them really. I mean, we kind
No.
of saw that one guy, but like, I don't know. I don't know.
Do you have any other theories before we get into our final verdict?
No, I think we kind of covered them all throughout the episode a little bit. Um, I think there's, I mean, obviously we're going to see Mando. It's like, who else are we going to see from that show and how they tie it into Mando season 3 as well as Bad Batch season 2 and potentially other characters. I think Bosk is a possibility, enlisting other bounty hunters' help other than just Mando. So we could see some cool cameos there. But I think it's going to end with a banger of the last 3 episodes. Honestly, I think they're gonna put a lot of cards on the table here and finish the season strong. So I think the next 3 episodes will probably be some of the best in the season.
And on top of that, whatever Dave Filoni's doing in his episode, I always get the notion that one of his characters that he helped create is going to be involved. You know, whether that's Cad Bane or somebody else from Clone Wars. Whenever they give Dave a standalone episode, usually that incorporates some very familiar character from the past. So I'm really anxious to see what Dave Filoni does with his episode in particular, which is not this week. I think it's the week after.
Yeah.
So I'd be anxious to see what he does with that. But with that being said, let's get into our final verdict. What would you rate this out of 10?
I would rate this episode I'd say 7.3 out of 10. It's pretty high, I think. I think it's a pretty good rating. I did really like it. I know I criticized it a lot, but I loved the seismic charges thing. I loved going back to the Sarlacc pit. I loved the beginning of this episode. I did. I thought the makeup and effects were excellent. The storyline building between Boba and Fennec were excellent. I thought the shooting down of the biker gang was awesome. I thought the action sequence going to Jabba's palace, the fighting of the droids down there, getting his ship back, I thought was really, really good. It wasn't like the best episode of the season, I don't think. I think still episode 2 is probably my favorite thus far, but I thought it was still a strong episode. What about you?
It's kind of funny. I gave it a 7.2.
Wow.
Yeah.
We are
so
right on the money.
So it's the middle ground. You know, I don't think anything in this show so far has come close to how much I liked episode 2 in particular. I think episode 2 is the strongest of the series thus far, and I had such a good time with it, and I thought it hit all the right notes with me. I have been enjoying the show genuinely, but after this last episode, I would not say that I'm emotionally attached to Boba or Fennec. Like, I feel like there's a disconnect for me there where I'm having a hard time feeling very connected to their story, or, you know, caring about seeing him succeed. And, you know, like, that could change within the last 3 episodes, and I'm totally open to that. But it did kind of lose me on that in this last episode, which is not to say I haven't been enjoying the show so far. I have been enjoying it a lot, and I think it's got some extremely good Star Wars moments in it. I also think that it's just had kind of like a couple misses, and that's not to say I hate the show. It's just kind of like, it's of the Star Wars content that's been out, I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but it's new Star Wars content, and I'm just happy to be here absorbing it and having a good time and critiquing it and loving certain things and disliking other things. And, you know.
Yeah. Well said. I agree with you. I think the tough thing for me right now is the motivating factor and the driving force behind Boba, because in Mandalorian season 1, for example, we have this mysterious child, right? And that's the whole driving force. There's this mystery episode to episode. What is going on with this Yoda-looking character? We don't have the same feeling here. There is some mystery behind the Pikes, but I don't feel like there's as much of a driving force that's pushing the plot forward episode to episode. And I could be totally wrong. I'm sure there's people that disagree with me and feel like there is more of that. I'm not getting that emotionally, like you mentioned.
No, not at all. And, you know, they have potential to pick it up within the last 3 episodes. I don't know if it's going to resonate with me personally, but I'm open to it. Like, you know, totally having my mind change. I don't think that there's anything in this show that's like ruined Star Wars for me.
No,
you know, it's like some things are either hit or miss. So
no, it's great. And I'm going to this is definitely a show I'd go back and rewatch. And that speaks for itself right there. So like, that's all. I think that's all that needs to be said. And I'm really excited for the next episode. Like, super excited. I think we're going to get some really big payoffs at the end of the season. So
crossing fingers.
We'll wait to see how they finish everything up.
Cool. So with that in mind, that is the end of our not Bad Batch. Oh my gosh. That is the end of our Book of Boba Fett breakdown, episode 4. You guys know the drill. Like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also find this video on Spotify video. So if you want to go watch us over there, please do. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you like listening to your show, because it does help us and it boosts us in the numbers. And drop a comment. We want to know what you guys think, and we want to have a discussion about it. What are you guys hoping to see in the show? Do you like the show so far? Do you have any frustrations? What makes you excited about this show? What gets you passionate about it? All that good stuff. Do you have anything else to add, Matt, before we say goodbye?
No, thank you for watching, guys. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok as well, *_wars_pod, and we will see you next week for our reaction videos to Book of Boba Fett Season 1, Episode 5. We'll see you next time.
See you guys.